Here is my New York State Militia Remington Rolling Block. It's chambered in the standard U.S. cartridge of the late 1860s and early 1870s, 5070 government. The 5070 cartridge is a big bore black powder cartridge, and as its name implies, it's a precursor to the more famous 4570. I have almost everything I need on hand to reload 5070. I have a set of dies, and a bullet mold, and bullets already cast from that mold. What I don't have, however, is brass. It seems as if brass hasn't been available for years, and when found, it's extremely expensive, upwards of $5 a piece. What I do have are brass shot shells, 32 gauge to be precise. These are around $40 for a box of 25, or $1.60 a piece. They compare well dimensionally to the 5070. The base diameter is spot on. The rim diameter is small, but that dimension isn't too critical. The rim thickness is undersized as well, but I'll go into depth on that later on. For now, the 32 gauge shot shell will be able to be converted to 5070. However, before I start, I want to make a note of how these cases are constructed. I'll compare to a 4570 case as a stand-in for most modern brass cases. The Magtech brass shot shells are what's known as balloon head cases. If I were to cut one of these in half, it would look somewhat like this, with the primer pocket protruding into the case. The 4570, on the other hand, again, like almost all modern cases, would look like this, with much more material around the base. Shotgun cases are low pressure, which is why the shot shells are constructed the way they are. When using these cases as a basis for conversion to a rifle or pistol caliber, you should only use black powder. It's up for debate whether smokeless loadings are okay in low pressures, but I'll be loading these with black powder exclusively. Now that that's out of the way, I can start the conversion process. Of course, the length is too long. 1.47 inches is the trim length on 5070. I'll mark it using calipers. To cut, I like to use this mini chop saw. I'll align the mark to the blade. And then make the cut. With this large cartridge, it's actually too big for the saw. I need to rotate it and cut it again. That's the rough length. To bring it to final dimension, I'll use the lathe. According to the calipers, I only need to take a hair off of the length and even it up. And while it's in here, I'll very carefully use a file to clean up the outside burr. I'll double check the length. I'm looking for between 1.74 and 1.75. That looks spot on. I'll deburr the inside of the case mouth. And this is why I deburred the outside with the file. It's too big to fit in here. Before sizing, I'll anneal the case. Softer brass will make the cartridge conversion much easier. I'll keep the case in the flame until the color just starts to change. While the 5070 is generally referred to as a straight-walled cartridge, it does taper slightly. The bullet can be dropped into the case. The sizing die will add the taper to the body of the case. In addition to annealing, using a good amount of sizing wax will make the conversion easier. For the shell holder, I'm using an RCBS number 31, which is for 5070. To start the conversion, instead of the sizing die, I'll actually use the seating die. The 32 gauge shot shells are actually a bit too large to fit into the mouth of the sizing die. Seating dies are a little bit bigger in diameter, and it's just enough to start sizing at about this point. With the case mouth reduced just slightly, I'll swap the seating die for the sizing die. I'll screw it down until it touches the shell holder. Then another quarter turn, and lock it down. Now to size, I'll add more case wax, and then size a small amount at a time. Then add more wax, and go again. My press needs to be re-greased, and it doesn't look much different, but here's the converted case. Instead of expanding the case for the bullet, I want to test the fit in the rifle first. I'll open the action and insert the case. I'll open the breech block partially before the extractor is triggered. I'm placing a rule across the back of the breech, and although it's an odd angle, I can insert a 12 thousandths feeler gauge between the rule and the case. Since the face of the breech block is flat, the case should be flush to the rear of the barrel. If there's a gap like this, then that means there's excess headspace. This isn't the best way to measure, but with limited space, and the fact that I don't want to take this apart, I'm looking at around 15 thousandths of excess headspace. The cause of this is the thinner rim of the 32 gauge shot shell. I measured it at 48 thousandths before, about 17 thousandths thinner than the 5070's measurement. A secondary cause may be the geometry of the rim. The top face of it is set at an angle on the 32 gauge shot shell. Looking at spec sheets of 5070 online, the shape of the rim should be almost identical to 4570, just a larger diameter. You can see how the rim is not only much thicker, but the top face is flat. The rim on the 32 gauge shot shell needs to be reshaped. I found this steel rod in my scrap bin, which is perfect for this. It's a 1/2 inch in diameter, and the case goes over it easily. The slat on the end fits around the primer pocket, so the case head is fully supported on the rod. What I'm going to do here is use a ball peen hammer on the rim, rotating the case as I go. I want to move the rim forwards, or from this perspective downwards, and thicken it. Brass is pretty soft, so this will form easily, However, it does work harden, so this will become harder as I go. You can see how the top of the rim, actually the bottom from this angle, is flattening out. More so on this side than this. I'll have to be sure to even this out. You could see before that I've been changing the angle of the hammer face, rotating it over, so I'm striking more on the side. I'll check to see which areas of the rim need more work. Just a few more passes around the rim to get this fully formed. With the shape of the rim now, it's hard to get an accurate measurement of its thickness. This is due to the chamfer that's now on the back of the rim. The calipers just slide off. I'll use this lathe tool, which measures just a hair over 1/4 inch. I'll hold it against the rear of the case and use it to get an accurate measurement of the rim thickness. That's 315 thousandths. Subtracting the 1/4 inch of the lathe tool, the rim thickness alone is approximately 65 thousandths, which is a perfect match for the 50/70 dimensions. It's also 17 thousandths thicker than the 48 thousandths the 32 gauge shot shell originally measured at. Here you can see the new shape of the rim, flat on the top and chamfered on the bottom. That's opposite of how the 32 gauge shot shell originally looked, which is flat on the bottom and chamfered on the top. The reformed rim on the left should be a much better fit in a 50/70 chambered rifle. And to test it out, it fits in well, just like before. But unlike before, the bottom of the case is pretty much flush with the rear of the breech. Here's the converted brass from 32 gauge shot shell to 50/70 government. Resizing to 50/70 isn't too hard. Reforming the rim is tedious work, especially for more than a handful of pieces. But instead of that, I could have taken the converted brass before peening the rim and a rubber O-ring. Probably a bit thinner than this one pictured here, but this is what I have on hand. With it slid down the case ahead of the rim, it will compress, take up any extra headspace on the action. The breech block is hard to close all the way, but it will close enough to allow the hammer to drop. Whether you decide to go the O-ring route or the reformed rim route, the 32 gauge shot shells are a good stand-in for 50/70 brass. You can see which I chose. Now to load these up. I have the expanding die in the press. The reformed rims still fit in the same number 31 shell holder. The only difference in the loading process with these former shot shells is that they use large pistol primers instead of rifle. Here's the loaded round, ready for the range.
Yep.
It fired fine, and there is enough of a rim for the extractor to function. The fired case looks good. There's no signs of excess headspace, such as a bulge, case head separation, or pushed primer. Now I know what you're thinking. The peening of the rim seems like a lot of work for just one case, and it is. But as far as cartridge conversion goes, this isn't a 32 gauge shot shell made to work in a 5070 chamber. These are now 5070 cases, and I don't need to worry about O-rings or anything else getting in the way. These function exactly as a 5070 case does. And with that, thanks for watching.